Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I support the legislation before us, and this debate has been with me for 2 decades now. I was in the State Parliament of Western Australia back with the Honourable Agricultural Minister Kim Chance, who was involved in these debates 2 decades ago, and I've got the Hansard here from August 2003. And frankly, it's interesting how little the key issues in this debate have changed, which was he called out the fact that someone in the reporting was not telling the truth. He raised the allegations that had been made about the evidence and the way it was put together for the 60 Minutes report at the time. And he said he wouldn't build on those rumours, but he said, I hope someone is seeking the facts of the matter. But what actually was revealed within that was extraordinarily high levels of sheep deaths at sea at that time. I sat on the petitions committee of the Legislative Council that really looked at the issues way back in 2002. We looked at the Commonwealth and state jurisdiction. We looked at the enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act of 2002. We looked at actions that the state government could take. And we also looked at concerns that the live sheep trade was undermining more lucrative, job-creating processed meat trade. And the simple fact is that in the 2 decades since that time, the live sheep trade from Western Australia has declined, and processed meat exports from Western Australia and the rest of the country have climbed dramatically. And I'll concede that there will be, frankly, new policy issues that come to the fore that will revisit some other policy debates that we might have had in this place from some time ago, like the fact that our processed meat gets overseas on flights from right around the country, which would bring to the fore, for example, what role Qatar Airlines might have in the future in export of processed meat from Western Australia. But these are the kinds of policy issues that I would contend will be part of these considerations in the future. I have to say, today I received a text message from a friend of mine who is a wheat and sheep farmer. And he said to me, not every farmer thinks banning live sheep is the wrong way to go. And he's not the only farmer in Western Australia that I have spoken to personally from different farming regions around the state who is of that opinion. And when you look at the trajectory of the industry, it's little wonder that they think that. They want to see a modernised sheep industry, wool industry, meat processing industry in Western Australia. These debates have gone on, in their view, for far too long. And in that time, too many people find themselves more and more on the margins of the debate, when actually, as the report from the task force reveals, we just want to get on with working with these communities, growing their employment opportunities, and improving the viability of the sheep industries in Western Australia. The simple truth is, unlike other states that don't export live sheep, Western Australia has, to some extent, had its head in the sand on where we're at on this issue, because no other state has this level of dependence on live sheep. But actually, it's wrong of me to say this level of dependence, because frankly, Western Australia's sheep and farming industry is not dependent on the live sheep trade. Far from it. We know that in 2021-22, the WA flock was 12.4 million head, 50% lower than the early 2000s, dramatically lower than at its peak of 38 million head in 1990. And these are the very time periods that I have been talking about. This reduction in sheep numbers occurred long before many of the current live export animal welfare requirements were introduced. We know that merino sheep make up some 80% of the state's flock, with the remainder being meat-specific breeds such as the Dorper. Our sheep flock has evolved over the past 2 decades with more lambs and fewer wethers, largely in response to the growing demand for lamb to process as sheep meat. And if you look at the industry figures, it's got very little to do with the kind of debate and the legislation that's before us tonight, but these numbers really reflect the rise of sheep meat exports and the drop in live exports across Western Australia. I support the new jobs that will be in these industries, including meat processing. The Australian Meat Workers Union said regardless of whether sheep are exported live or processed locally onshore, all the jobs in the supply chain up until that point remain the same. The only difference is if the truck turns right to the port and the live export sheep are loaded with a handful of stockmen and an Australian vet accompanies them on their journey. But if a truck turns left and takes those animals to a processing facility, it will employ some 500 to 800 people directly, and many more in the industry. Other evidence from the task force heard that major processors across Western Australia feel confident they can expand operations and pick up any available animals due to the end of live exports. Roger Fletcher from Fletcher's International Exports, they have a processing facility in Albany. They've said the amount of live sheep sent overseas every year could be processed in Australia in 4 days. Fletcher's International Exports and local processor WAMCO have said that their processing facilities over the next couple of years could be used to deal with increased demand. So let's take a look at the facts in the context of this debate tonight. The live sheep export industry has been in decline for many years. It's shrunk from $415 million in 2002, 2003, the time that I was just speaking of at the beginning of my remarks, to just $77 million this financial year. And those figures are but a tiny fraction of our overall sheep industry, let alone animal industries in Australia. Over that same time period, demand for processed sheep meat both here and overseas has been rapidly expanding, and we have an enormous opportunity with the package before us in the Parliament tonight to take our government's commitment, a commitment of $107 million that can now be used to realise growing export market opportunities and growing job opportunities for regional communities around Western Australia. $4.5 billion worth of sheep meat was exported from Australia last year, with our domestic sheep meat industry being worth $3.5 billion. So that's overall $8 billion, with only $77 million of that in live sheep exports. Now, with $107 million on the table for our package for Western Australia to build new processing facilities and to work with local industries, we can grow the viability of our farming industries and sheep industries even more. There's a strong future for the WA sheep industry, with more sheep meat processing creating hundreds of local jobs, greater benefit to our local economy. We've done the work, and now it's time to get this funding moving and start growing West Australian jobs.